The camera light blinked red on the polished mahogany conference table, and I knew my 30 years had just expired. Brendan Vance sat across from me in a leather chair that probably cost more than my first car. A chair I'd helped him buy with stock options I'd earned through sleepless nights and sacrificed anniversaries. He was smiling. That was the cruelest part. Not the anger I deserved, not the conflict of a difficult decision, but a smile that suggested he was watching someone else's life dissolve. "Walter," he began, his voice carrying the manufactured concern of a man reading from a script, "we need dynamism. We need innovation. We need someone who understands the future, not someone who's still living in the past." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a blade. "Your 30 years of service are noted in the company records. But effective immediately, your position is terminated. For cause." My chest tightened. I'd been expecting this. The industry whispers, the junior executives sidelined around me, the new CEO they'd installed without my input. But preparation and reality are different animals. "For cause," I heard myself say. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another room. "Age-related incompetence," Brendan replied with the efficiency of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. He gestured to HR's vice president, a nervous creature named Finn who wouldn't meet my eyes. "Which means, of course, that your unvested equity is forfeited." Immediately. All of it. The room spun. That equity wasn't money. It was survival. It was Laura's heart medication, the specialized treatment that cost $4,000 a month, the prescription that kept her alive. It was our emergency fund for the emergencies that come with a wife's declining health. It was the future I'd been building brick by brick for 3 decades. "Brendan," I said carefully, as if speaking to a child who didn't understand the weight of his own words, "that stock represents Laura's medical fund. You know she needs." "I know," he interrupted, and something in his expression shifted. For just a moment I saw the boy I'd raised alongside his mother. The child who'd cried when his hamster died. The teenager I'd helped with his business school applications. That Brendan was still in there, somewhere, buried under ambition and fear. "I'm sorry about that, Walter. But business is business. The board made this decision, not me." It was a lie. The board rubber-stamped everything Brendan decided. We both knew it. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white, bloodless. I wanted to scream. I wanted to overturn this table and watch his confidence shatter the way mine just had. Instead, I took a breath and stood. "My office?" I asked. "Already been cleared," Finn said quietly. "Your personal items are in a box downstairs." Of course they were. I am Walter James Vance, 55 years old, and I built the machine that just destroyed me. Every piece of code in Apex OS, the software that powered Vance Global's entire operation, that processed billions in transactions annually, that made Brendan a fortune while he was still learning how to tie his shoes, that came from my mind. My vision. My sacrifice. I walked through the lobby like a ghost moving through a familiar haunting. Every face I passed belonged to someone I'd trained, mentored, or promoted. They looked away. That's what people do when someone becomes a cautionary tale. The glass doors slid open, and the morning air hit my face like a slap. I stood outside the Vance Global building, the building I'd helped design, holding a cardboard box containing 30 years of my professional life. A photo of Laura before the diagnosis. A plaque marking my 15th anniversary. A coffee mug that said "World's Best Boss," that someone had given me as a joke. My phone was already buzzing. My wife, my real wife Laura, had called 3 times. A dozen text messages from colleagues asking if the rumors were true. Nothing from Patricia, Brendan's mother, who'd been my wife for the last 5 years and who I suspected had seen this coming. I had to get to Laura's pharmacy. I had to confirm what I already knew. Without the medical fund, we had maybe 2 months before her prescriptions ran out. 2 months before her heart began its slow, inevitable decline. 2 months before I lost everything that mattered. That's when I saw her. A woman in a charcoal power suit leaning against a pristine black sedan. She was in her late 40s, with sharp features and eyes that calculated everything they looked at. I'd seen her photograph in business magazines. Vivian Hayes, Chief Strategy Officer of Aegis Analytics, the consulting firm that specialized in high-risk audits of companies like Vance Global. She pushed off from the car and crossed toward me with the kind of deliberate purpose that suggested nothing she did was accidental. "Walter Vance?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "I just watched your stepson commit age discrimination and stock fraud in front of a room full of witnesses with a camera recording everything." She tilted her head, studying me. "And I watched a genius walk out with a cardboard box like he's nobody. That interests me." My first instinct was to dismiss her. Vivian Hayes didn't approach people in parking lots without a reason. People like that always had an angle. I'm not interested in a lawsuit, I said. I have other priorities. I know, Vivian replied. I know about Laura. I know about her condition. I know you're currently calculating how many months you have before everything falls apart. She held out a black business card with minimalist white lettering. Which is exactly why what I'm about to offer you is perfect timing. I looked at the card without taking it. I know Apex OS, she continued. I've studied it for 3 years. It's brilliant, elegant, almost impenetrable. But there's something unique about it, isn't there? Something the new team at Vance Global doesn't understand. Something that only you understand. My pulse quickened. I didn't respond. I'm offering you a position at Aegis Analytics, Vivian said. Chief Architect. Salary is $850,000 a year, effective immediately. We need you to do 2 things. First, build us a replacement system that can handle enterprise-level financial transactions. Second, help us understand exactly how Vance Global systems work so we can properly audit them. She smiled. The second part is where you get your revenge. I didn't hesitate. We drove to Aegis's downtown offices in a silence that felt like the moment before a storm. Vivian didn't make small talk. She didn't try to convince me. She simply let me sit with the decision I'd already made. There's something you should know about Apex OS, I said as we pulled into the parking garage. Something I never documented. Something I built specifically so I would never lose control of what I created. Vivian glanced at me, and I saw the faintest smile touch her lips. Tell me. I explained the source key maintenance cycle, the SKMC. The secret failsafe I'd encoded deep into Apex's foundational architecture. It was elegant, really. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Every 180 days the system required a validation signal, a specific cryptographic key that only I possessed, held within an encryption protocol so complex that it would take a team of hackers years to crack it. Without that validation, the system would begin a cascading data corruption. Not a crash. Not something obvious. But a slow, inevitable degradation that would eventually render the entire database unusable. The corruption would be irreversible. When is the next validation due? Vivian asked. In approximately 70 days, I said. 2 months and 10 days to be exact. And Brendan knows nothing about this? No one knows about this. It was my insurance policy. My way of ensuring that even if I was removed, no one could truly build on what I created without my cooperation. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, we need to document this. Legally. We need to ensure your intellectual property rights are protected. Brendan's termination of your position has a serious legal vulnerability. Age discrimination is a federal violation, which means your non-compete clause is void. And the SKMC technology predates Vance Global by nearly a decade. You built it under Genesis software, correct? Correct. Then it belongs to you. Completely. And we're going to prove it. The legal paperwork took 4 hours. By the time it was filed, the evening sun was painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I drove to County Medical Center instead of going home. Laura was sleeping when I entered her room. Even in rest, she looked fragile, like something made of paper and held together by determination alone. But when she woke to the sound of the door closing, she smiled. That smile was everything. It was the reason I'd built an empire. The reason I was about to potentially destroy one. Hello, love, she whispered. Her voice was soft, but there was strength beneath it. Laura had always been strong, even as her body betrayed her. I kissed her forehead. I got a new job, I said. Her eyes widened. She knew what had happened today. The medical community was small and word traveled fast. A very good job, I continued, with a company called Aegis Analytics. Better salary, better benefits, better everything. I sat on the edge of her hospital bed, careful not to disturb the 4-line. We're going to be fine, Laura. I promise you. We're going to be more than fine. Walter. She reached out and took my hand. What did you do? I didn't answer directly. I couldn't. What I'd done, what I was planning to do, Laura didn't need to know. Some knowledge was a burden, and she was carrying enough already. I took back control, I said finally, of my own life, of my own future. She squeezed my hand and closed her eyes again, and I sat there in the dimming light, already beginning to calculate the moves ahead. The first 2 months at Aegis Analytics were consumed by work that looked, to any external observer, like simple architectural design. I was building a replacement system for Apex OS, a next-generation platform that would handle enterprise-level financial transactions with greater security, faster processing, and complete transparency. It was legitimate work. Important work. The kind of work I should have been doing all along, if Brendan hadn't stolen my future. But it was also cover. Because while I worked on the new system by day, I worked on something else by night. I worked on understanding exactly what Brendan was doing with the company I'd built. And I watched as he systematically dismantled it. He was hemorrhaging money. Not from mismanagement, though there was plenty of that. But from desperation. He'd committed to something, some venture that required capital he didn't have. The quarterly reports showed assets being liquidated at panic prices. Real estate holdings sold for fractions of their value. Subsidiary companies divested with breathtaking speed. Brendan was scared. I found out why in the third month. The Continental Trust Bank contract, Vivian said, sliding a file across her desk. Vance Global's largest government-backed deal. Brendan's betting everything on it. If it fails, the company collapses. If it succeeds, he recovers everything he's lost. How much? I asked. $3.2 billion. Initial deposit. With recurring contracts, it could exceed $10 billion over 5 years. There it was. Brendan's lifeline. His last chance to salvage the empire before it crumbled. The signing ceremony is scheduled for 63 days from now, Vivian continued, at the Continental Trust Bank's downtown office. It's being treated as the event of the year. Federal regulators will be present, including the chair of the Federal Reserve Bank's Oversight Committee. The event will be live-streamed. Every major business news outlet will have reporters there. I understood what she wasn't saying. The SKMC validation was due in 58 days. The system collapse would occur during the most public moment of Brendan's career. In front of federal regulators. In front of the international business community. There's more, Vivian said, and her voice took on a different quality, something harder, more dangerous. We found something in the due diligence process. Something that changes the equation. The files were extensive. High-resolution photographs. Expense reports. Hotel registration documents. Travel itineraries to Caribbean resorts and luxury properties in Aspen and Monaco. All of them connected Brendan to someone named Willow Caldwell. Who is she? I asked. The wife of Ian Caldwell, Vivian replied. Chief Regulatory Officer for the Federal Reserve Bank. The man who approves or denies contracts exactly like Continental Trust. The implications crystallized in my mind like ice forming on a winter lake. He's using the affair as leverage, I said slowly. More than that, Vivian corrected. He's using it to blackmail. The expense reports show that Brendan has been funding Willow's lifestyle, jewelry, travel, properties. Over $4 million in the last 18 months alone. And Mr. Caldwell knows about it. He has to know. Which means he's allowing it. Which means Brendan has information on Caldwell, or Caldwell is being paid directly through shell companies. It's regulatory corruption. It is. Which means if the Continental Trust contract fails at the moment it's being signed, if the system crashes, if regulators begin investigations, Caldwell will be implicated. He'll try to disassociate from Brendan immediately. And when he does, the entire house of cards falls. I understood the elegance of it now. Not just revenge. Justice. Perfect mathematical justice. I need something, I said. I need to understand exactly what Brendan knows about Caldwell. And I need to know if there's anything in that affair that would destroy Caldwell's career as thoroughly as it will destroy Brendan's. Vivian smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. The property on Maple Street had been part of Vance Global since the beginning. It was where we'd housed the first servers, back when the company was nothing but a dream and a team of idealists working 16-hour days in a converted warehouse. Brendan had marked it for sale months ago. It was underperforming, he said. Non-core business, he claimed. In reality, he wanted it gone because it represented the past, and the past was an inconvenient reminder of where his empire had come from. From me. The building still contained the original server archives. Decades of backup data, system logs, foundational architecture documentation. Everything that proved Apex OS was built on Genesis software, the original platform I'd created and maintained under my own private corporation. Vivian arranged the acquisition through a shell company so buried in legal structure that it would take months to trace it back to either of us. We used the retainer sheet provided, enough to establish legitimate business credentials, and outbid a developer who wanted the land for a luxury apartment complex. When I stood in the basement of that building for the first time since Brendan took over Vance Global, I felt something shift in my chest. This was the birthplace of my life's work. This was where I'd learned what I was capable of. And it was where I found the smoking gun, tucked into an encrypted partition of the original server system. A partition I'd created specifically for sensitive documents, were expense files that proved something even more damning than the affair. They proved that Brendan had known about it. That Brendan had documented it. That Brendan had kept meticulous records of every payment, every hotel stay, every gift purchased with company money that was theoretically meant for operational expenses. It wasn't just an affair. It was a contract. A transaction. A carefully documented arrangement between a CEO and a Federal Reserve official's wife. He kept records, I said to Vivian over the phone. Detailed records. Travel dates, payment amounts, even notes about their conversations. Why would he document something so dangerous? Vivian asked. Because Brendan always documents everything, I replied. It's how his mind works. He needs to feel in control. He needs proof of what he's orchestrated. It's his weakness. Then we have everything we need, Vivian said. The question is, when do we use it? I moved into a small apartment across the city from the house I'd shared with Patricia. She called me twice a week, always requesting the same thing. Drop the legal claims, stop interfering with Brendan's business, return to a reasonable approach to our divorce settlement. I never answered. I simply let the calls go to voicemail. Instead, I spent my time at Laura's hospital room. I moved her to a private facility where the care was exceptional and the cost was astronomical. Vivian's salary made it possible. I sat beside her bed and told her stories about my work, though I omitted the essential details. I held her hand through the moments when her medication made her drowsy and confused. I read to her from books she loved. And I watched the calendar. 60 days until the Continental Trust signing. 60 days until Brendan's world collapsed exactly as he deserved. The anticipation was almost unbearable. Vivian was executing her own strategy. Aegis Analytics began publishing white papers on corporate system architecture, specifically highlighting vulnerabilities in enterprise platforms like Apex OS. Nothing mentioned Vance Global by name, but industry insiders understood the implications. The Federal Reserve began requiring additional audits of financial institutions using older software platforms. Regulatory pressure mounted. Brendan was sweating even if he didn't know why. In the 5th week he called me. Walter. His voice was different, tighter with an edge I'd never heard before. I heard you bought the Maple Street property. That's strange. What would Aegis want with that old server farm? Just maintaining the historical archives, I said calmly. Seems important that the original code be properly preserved. There was a silence on the line. Then, look, I'm willing to make an offer. For the property. $50,000. You can use it for Laura's medical bills. No hard feelings about any of this. We're family. I almost laughed. We were family, I said. That ended when you decided that your career was worth more than her life. Keep your money, Brendan. I don't want it. I hung up before he could respond. 48 hours before the Continental Trust signing, I activated the final sequence. I sat in the Genesis software server room beneath Vance Global's primary operations center. A room that no one knew existed, buried so deep in the building's infrastructure that even the new security team couldn't find it. I'd kept access through a proprietary backdoor, one that existed in the code itself, woven so deeply into the system's architecture that removing it would have required rebuilding Apex OS from scratch. I typed the command that would initiate the cascading failure of the SKMC protection. Failure _initiate. The system beeped once. A confirmation. The countdown had begun. In exactly 26 hours, the SKMC would trigger. The data corruption would begin. And at the exact moment when Continental Trust executives were preparing to sign the largest contract in Vance Global's history, the system would crash. Not gradually. Not slowly. But catastrophically. I watched the confirmation message scroll across the screen. Validation. Terminate. Current stream triggered filter ring fine. 26.0 critical unscare. Perfect. I extracted the Genesis software documentation from the server room's secure vault. The original technical specifications that proved every line of code in Apex OS descended from my original work. I packaged it carefully alongside the photographs and expense reports from the Maple Street archives. Then I went home to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would be the day everything changed. The Continental Trust Bank's downtown offices had been transformed into a grand ballroom for the signing ceremony. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Champagne was being served. Business leaders mingled with federal regulators in a careful dance of professional courtesy and aggressive networking. I stood at the rear of the ballroom, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that cost more than my first month's salary at Vance Global had been. Next to me, Vivian looked like she'd been made of stone and sharp intentions. She was the picture of professional authority. Aegis Analytics' presence at the signing had been officially justified as independent audit verification. At the front of the room, Brendan stood with Patricia. My former wife wore a champagne-colored dress and a smile that suggested she'd already mentally moved into that Tuscany villa. I watched them like a chess master studying the moment before checkmate. The master of ceremonies, a woman from Continental Trust with the efficient bearing of someone who organized multi-billion-dollar transactions regularly, stepped to a podium. Ladies and gentlemen, in approximately 30 minutes, we will finalize the strategic partnership between Continental Trust Bank and Vance Global. This contract represents an unprecedented commitment to enterprise-level financial innovation. It's a historic moment and we're privileged to witness it. The crowd applauded. Champagne glasses were raised. Brendan's smile was the smile of a man who believed his worst days were behind him. He had no idea that his worst days were 26 minutes away. I glanced at my watch. 1:04 p.m. 26 minutes until 1:30 p.m. 26 minutes until the SKMC validation failed. 26 minutes until everything he'd built came crashing down. At 1:15 p.m., the first sign appeared on the massive display screens mounted throughout the ballroom. The screens were meant to showcase Vance Global's financial dashboard in real time, displaying the company's stability and computational capacity to the assembled regulators. Instead, the image froze. Then it glitched, a cascading wave of digital corruption that looked like watching someone age 1,000 years in 3 seconds. Lines of data fragmented, numbers recombined into nonsense, and the sophisticated graphics devolved into a pulsing field of error codes. The room went quiet. Brendan's face changed. I watched the color drain from his features in real time, like watching someone's confidence evaporate. "It's just a refresh error," the fake CTO that Brendan had hired shouted from a laptop, his voice cracking with anxiety. "Network lag. Give me 30 seconds. But 30 seconds wouldn't fix what was happening. 30 seconds wouldn't rebuild the foundational architecture that I'd spent 3 months perfecting in my sabotage. 30 seconds wouldn't restore the validation signal that his team didn't even know existed. Ian Caldwell, the Federal Reserve regulator seated in the front row, leaned over to his colleague with a concerned expression. The Continental Trust executives exchanged looks that suggested they were already mentally calculating the legal implications of stepping back from this contract. At 1:29 p.m., the screens went completely dark. They illuminated a moment later with a single message in the font I'd used to code Apex OS warning protocols. Error _ 550. Code of integrity. Access _ denied. Not read. Not flashing. Just that simple, absolute statement of system death. And beneath it, in smaller text, authentication for validation expired. System _ irreversible. Brendan launched from his seat like he'd been electrocuted. He screamed something unintelligible, then he screamed my name. "Walter. You old fool. You did this." I didn't respond. I simply rose from my seat and began walking to the podium with Vivian one step behind me. Security tried to stop me, but Vivian's credentials as a registered auditor overrode any objection. I stepped up to the podium and tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a judge's gavel. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear, "I am Walter James Vance, the original architect of Apex OS and the chief architect of Aegis Analytics. For 30 years, I designed and maintained the system that powers Vance Global's operations. I am here to inform you that as of 1:30 p.m., Apex OS has experienced a catastrophic and irreversible failure." The room erupted in questions, but I raised my hand and continued. This failure was not accidental. It was deliberately engineered by me 26 hours ago, as an insurance mechanism against the theft of my intellectual property. I gestured to the screens. When I was terminated from Vance Global 3 months ago based on age discrimination, a federal violation, I retained ownership of the security protocols embedded in Apex OS. These protocols cannot be overridden. They cannot be repaired. And they cannot be reactivated without my authorization. Furthermore, I said, holding up a USB drive, I have documentation that proves the CEO of Vance Global has engaged in the systematic corruption of federal regulatory processes. I have evidence of a multimillion-dollar affair being financed with company money, specifically designed to influence the federal oversight that was required for this very contract. I inserted the USB drive into the podium's connection system. The screens flickered, and suddenly the private photographs appeared. Hotel receipts, travel itineraries, bank transfers. All of it connecting Brendan Vance to Willow Caldwell. All of it documented with the kind of obsessive detail that only exists when someone is keeping insurance against their own crimes. I watched Ian Caldwell's face transform. Watched his hand move instinctively toward his phone. Watched the moment his career imploded into a single, catastrophic realization. Patricia gasped. Her hand covered her mouth like she was physically trying to prevent her shock from escaping. Brendan stood frozen, watching his empire disintegrate on a projection screen. "This is a criminal matter," Ian Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Federal authorities will be involved. This contract is officially disqualified. Vance Global is under investigation effective immediately." The room exploded into confusion. People were shouting, reaching for phones, already calculating how to distance themselves from Vance Global before the regulatory storm landed. I calmly disconnected the USB drive and stepped down from the podium. Vivian was already directing Aegis Security to secure the documentation. Behind her, lawyers appeared, documents drawn up weeks in advance, ready to be filed the moment this moment occurred. Brendan tried to grab my arm as I walked past. "You'll go to prison for this," he spat. "Sabotage. Corporate espionage. I'll see you destroyed." "Perhaps," I said, meeting his eyes. "But you'll get there first." The rest happened exactly as Vivian had predicted. Federal investigators were in the Continental Trust offices within hours. Brendan was arrested on preliminary charges of regulatory fraud and conspiracy within 48 hours. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division opened a formal investigation into the affair and the money trail. Ian Caldwell resigned within days. His own career was destroyed by his wife's affair and his tacit approval of the financial arrangement, the implication being that he'd traded regulatory oversight for sexual access to his own wife's finances. Patricia filed for divorce. Her lawyers contacted me within a week to begin negotiating settlement terms. I gave her the house and a modest cash settlement. She wasn't my enemy. She was simply someone who'd prioritized comfort over humanity, and that was a distinction worth respecting even in divorce. Vance Global entered receivership. The board appointed an interim CEO, a safe, anonymous choice designed to keep the company operational while investigations proceeded. Vivian submitted Aegis's formal bid to take over the company's operations and technology contracts. The bid was accepted within days. Laura was awake when I arrived at her hospital room that evening. She'd been watching the news on the small television mounted in the corner. The Continental Trust disaster was already being reported as the largest financial scandal of the decade. "Walter," she said as I entered, "what did you do?" This time I told her the truth. I told her about the SKMC, about the affair, about Brendan's betrayal and Patricia's indifference, about the 3 months of meticulous planning and the 26-minute countdown to his destruction. Laura listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached out and took my hand. "Are you at peace?" she asked. I thought about that question carefully. Not happiness. Happiness felt too simple for what I'd accomplished. But peace. The absence of that gnawing desperation that had consumed me since my termination. "Yes," I said finally. "I am." "Good," Laura whispered. "Because I don't want our future to be built on revenge. I want it to be built on love." The courtroom was quiet as the federal judge read her decision. Brendan was being sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for regulatory fraud and corruption. Ian Caldwell received 5 years. Willow Caldwell accepted a plea deal that required her to cooperate with investigators. I sat in the gallery alongside Laura, who'd been released from the hospital 6 months ago. Her health had stabilized under the proper care and without the stress of financial uncertainty. She wore a simple blue dress and held my hand as the judge pronounced Brendan's fate. When it was over, we walked out into the afternoon sunlight together. Vance Global had been restructured. The company name was gone, replaced by something new, Aegis Systems. Most of the old employees had been replaced. The company's headquarters had been relocated. Everything that Brendan had built was being methodically dismantled and reconstructed under new leadership. Vivian had offered me the position of Chief Technology Officer. I'd accepted, but I'd negotiated a flexible schedule that allowed me to spend afternoons with Laura. Some victories are measured in time recovered, not just revenge exacted. We walked through the plaza outside the courthouse and Laura squeezed my hand gently. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked. I thought about Brendan's face when the system crashed. About the moment he realized that his arrogance had made him careless. About the choice I'd made to plan rather than rage, to calculate rather than react. "No," I said. "I don't regret it. But I'm grateful it's over. I don't want to be the man who lived for revenge anymore. I want to be the man who lives for you." Laura smiled, and in that smile I saw something I'd thought I'd lost. Hope. Not hope for vindication or justice, but hope for a future that was about building something, rather than destroying it. 5 years later, I stood in the lobby of Aegis Systems' new headquarters, a building I'd designed and that represented everything I believed in about what technology could be. The architecture emphasized openness, collaboration, and the kind of transparent processes that Vance Global had never allowed. Laura was beside me, her health fully restored. The specialized medication she'd needed was now part of her past. She wore a simple gold wedding band and a smile that suggested she'd found peace long before I had. "The team wants to see you," my assistant told me. "They're gathered in the presentation theater for the new system demonstration." I took Laura's hand and we walked toward the presentation theater. Inside, the next generation of young engineers I'd trained were showcasing the architecture of the new system, the one I'd designed to replace Apex OS. It was better, faster, more secure. And unlike Apex, it didn't have a hidden failsafe built into its foundations. I'd learned something important during those months of revenge. Power isn't measured in the ability to destroy. Real power is measured in the ability to create something that outlasts you, something that serves a purpose beyond your own needs. As I watched the young engineers present their work, I realized something had shifted inside me. The bitterness I'd carried for so long had transformed into something else entirely. Not forgiveness for Brendan. Some things aren't forgivable. But something like peace. A recognition that I'd taken back control of my own narrative. Later, as Laura and I left the office, she asked me the same question she'd asked the day I told her the full truth about my revenge. "Are you at peace?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it. "Finally. I am." Because I'd learned the most important lesson. Revenge is a means to an end, but it's never the destination. The destination is building something meaningful with the time you've recovered. The destination is choosing love over bitterness. The destination is becoming someone who creates rather than someone who destroys. As we walked out into the evening air, the sun painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, I finally understood why I'd succeeded. Not because my plan was brilliant. Not because Brendan was careless. But because I'd used the pain as fuel to transform myself into someone stronger, sharper, and more focused than I'd ever been. Brendan had called me obsolete. But I'd walked out of his conference room and built a future he never could have imagined. And that, I thought as Laura leaned her head on my shoulder, was the greatest revenge of all. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by my stepson's cruel seating chart. My story proves that silence was my weapon, letting me embed the secret source key maintenance cycle within the Apex OS he thought he owned. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your boundaries don't make you difficult. I didn't beg after my mother chose a villa. I simply triggered the system failure at 1:30 p.m. and exposed the affair to the regulator. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Your worth was only ever waiting to be remembered. Have you ever had to prove your worth to a family that underestimated you? Share your story below.